We have some big updates in the case of the college cheerleader and beauty queen accused of disposing of her baby's body in the closet of her apartment after giving birth. This is video of her in court per WBIR TV. And we've also learned that her ex-boyfriend has reportedly given a DNA sample to police. One of the big questions in this story that's still unanswered is who's that child's father? And who else could face charges in this shocking case, as we're also learning more about her cheerleading career. This video is of Laken Snelling months before her arrest during a competition per Flow Cheer on YouTube. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Laken Snelling is facing some very serious charges. She's currently home on house arrest, out on bond, and we have learned that she is no longer a student at the University of Kentucky. Snelling has withdrawn from the school. She's no longer a member of its competitive cheerleading team. We also have learned more information on the search for the baby's dad and figuring out who that person is. I'll get into that new information in just a moment, but this is what we know about Snelling, who at this point is the only person facing charges in this case. She's been a member of the stunt team for the past 3 seasons at the University of Kentucky. She was listed as a junior on the roster for the Kentucky Wildcats, and this is new video that's been unearthed of Snelling competing with the team in a video posted 4 months ago per Flow Cheer on YouTube, so it is possible that she was pregnant during this event. Now, Snelling also used to be a beauty queen, and she often posted on social media, spending time with her friends, really giving off this happy image, but now she is accused of such a dark crime. Snelling also has pictures with the boy, but it is unclear whether they are still together, and it's unclear if he's the biological father of the baby at the center of this story. We have learned that a male reportedly gave a DNA sample to police. I'll talk about who he is in just a moment, but let's get to what Snelling is accused of and how we got to this point. Let's go to August 27th. Lexington, Kentucky police were called to a home for a report of an unresponsive infant. That child was pronounced dead on scene, according to police, and according to WLEX TV, police say that the baby was found inside of a closet. Now, an arrest citation says the infant was wrapped in a towel inside of a black trash bag. The citation reportedly says that Snelling was read her rights and she allegedly admitted to giving birth to that baby, and we have learned it was a boy. Then she said that she concealed the birth by cleaning up evidence and then putting all the cleaning items inside of that black trash bag along with the body of the newborn. Now, it's unclear just how old the baby was and how far along Snelling was in her pregnancy when she gave birth. Based on what we're learning about this case, it's unclear if Snelling said anything about who the baby's father was to police, or frankly, if she knows who the baby's father is. An initial autopsy on the baby came back inconclusive. Now, it's important to say that this is not a murder case at this point. More tests are being done to determine the cause of death of the child and whether that baby took a breath after being born, or if the baby was stillborn. Now, there are some pictures of Snelling with the man on social media, so let's dive into that part of this story. It's unclear who the man is and whether he is the father of this child. The New York Post is reporting that an ex-boyfriend of Snelling gave a DNA sample to police. The Post spoke to that boy's dad, who would only say that police requested his son go to the station and it would take a couple weeks to get the results. The Daily Mail is reporting that the 21-year-old who gave a sample dated Snelling before she started dating someone else. Now, it's unclear if Snelling was still in a relationship with the man who is in the pictures with her, and we are not identifying either of the men we're talking about in this story, as they have not been charged. Now, this is video of 21-year-old Laken Snelling when she made her first court appearance after her arrest. You can see she appeared in that red dress and pleaded not guilty to charges of abuse of a corpse, tampering with physical evidence, and concealing the birth of an infant. Snelling posted a $100,000 bond and is now on house arrest, living with her parents. She doesn't have to wear an ankle monitor. She has pleaded not guilty to the charges. Police will only say they were called to Snelling's home for the report of an unresponsive infant, but it's unclear who called them to that house and what that person found. Another shocking part of all of this is that it appears that Snelling presented herself publicly as someone who had aspirations to one day be a mom. Here's the last post that she had on TikTok. It's from June, and it's a picture with emojis that describe her. And in the bottom left, we notice there is one that says goals, and that shows an emoji of a mom with a child. Even though Snelling appears to present herself as someone who's warm and bubbly on social media, there's at least one person who says the real Laken Snelling is far different than that image. 20-year-old Sydney Kite spoke to the Daily Mail. She went to high school with Snelling, and she said that Snelling would take her anger out on people. Kite said, quote, while in high school, she tried to run over one of my closest friends with her Jeep. The bullying got so bad, my friend had to be pulled out of school and transferred to another because Laken had taken it so far. Kite also accused Snelling of cyberbullying with text messages. Kite did not appear to hold back in saying that Laken only hung out with people who were popular and had money, and she said that Laken Snelling was just obsessed with her appearance and what other people thought. On top of that, again, she said Snelling once tried to run someone over with a Jeep. Of course, we have to say, when you hear that story, there is the question of, does being a bully translate to allegedly hiding your dead baby's body? Perhaps not, but it does paint the picture of the type of suspect Laken Snelling may be. She's pleaded not guilty to the charges, and she is due back in court on September 26th. In getting ready for this story, we researched Laken Snelling's background. We know that she is originally from Tennessee, and she also does not have any previous criminal record, at least from what we can see on truthfinder.com. At Law&Crime, we partner with Truthfinder, and we use it to get details on the people who are involved in our stories. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can be an excellent resource to give you some peace of mind, as it's one of the largest public record search services in the US. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Joining us now is retired NYPD Detective David Sarney. It's always great to have you on Law&Crime. You know, really tough case here. Just very sad for the loss of this infant's life, and we're still figuring out exactly how that happened. But some of the new information that's come out that we're focusing on today is kind of the question of who's the dad? You know, who is the biological father of this baby? I mean, in these cases, why is it difficult to figure out exactly who the dad may be?
Well, thank you for having me, but here comes a lot of issues now. Now the cooperation is gone. She has been arrested and cited for the tampering with evidence right now, so that's one aspect to it. So you have to now go into a deeper dive, maybe computer forensics, phone calls and the like on that end. But you now, I know one person has, one of her boyfriends has offered their DNA. They may have to go through a court order, and that's another thing into itself. So this is, unfortunately, the dynamics of this case are one of those things that, you know, you really have to do a true in-depth investigation. Like, was this initially set up as a crime scene for that location? The father, what contact does she have, or what contacts has she had with the person that is deemed the father? She may or may not know. She's not going to cooperate now, based on an attorney, and that's every attorney's right to keep their client silenced until this case goes on. But they want to see it. Maybe there's some sort of a line, some linear relationship to finding out that Laken knew she was pregnant and what relationship she had with the person that may be the father or not. So that's what it comes down to. It's very difficult at this point.
It is, yeah, because I think there's also the question too, with like, did she know she was pregnant? You know, in terms of like, when did she know that she was pregnant? Because there's this cheerleading video, and it was posted 4 months ago, which would be within the 9-month period, of course. So presuming that she was pregnant during this, and she's like on the top of a human pyramid, you know, that's not something that I bet a doctor would recommend as far as like how a pregnant woman, you know, at that, but like, we don't know. So there's so much, the question of like, did she like try to cover the fact that she was pregnant the entire time? And how does that factor in if she did take those types of steps to the type of charges you could face, or I guess the case that prosecutors could have against her?
Well, that's the thing. Now you're going to look at what she knows and what availability, and that's where you're going to have to go digital forensics. You're going to go into her phone, go into sites that she may or may not have been involved in. You're going to do all the work that you have to do to determine when she knew, and if she does know. You know, athletes can continue physical fitness events and things. Does that injure the person? Does that cause a problem? She's 21 years old, so it's a little different. But now you have to sort of figure out when she knew, what she knew, and if they do these checks on her phone, on her computer, a hard deep dive into the computer aspects, if anything. Was she researching any information? And if she was, what was the information she was researching? Did she know she was pregnant? Did she ever get a test to be pregnant? And that's why the contacts with the phone, text messages, are all going to be part of that. Did she ever tell anybody that she was pregnant? And that's one part of it. And then the other part is, now we want to see, what the criminality is. When we get these cases, unfortunately, when I think the autopsy was inconclusive, we call them in New York City, the NYPD called them cuppies. Circumstances unknown pending police investigation. And that's where the ME is going to get more information from the investigators to determine the facts of what may have led up to this baby's death. And right now, they don't have anything conclusive physically. They're going to do obviously more tests involved. And this is where the nuanced questions have to come in from the investigators and from the prosecutors to determine, after the fact that this, the continually work on the investigation on the autopsies, what questions they're going to ask, and make sure those questions that you're asking are clear, concise, to determine if there's criminality. Because sometimes it's horrible to think, but babies die. Babies do die, and that's when thing happens.
Well, and I keep saying, like, this isn't a murder case, at this point. But if the coroner comes back and says that this baby was alive when this baby was born, this wasn't a stillbirth situation, and like it makes this story really difficult to talk about because it's just incredibly sad and it's very graphic. These details we're talking about. I mean, if it does, when you see these cases and kind of the turn it could be, where if this baby was born alive, what does that mean for the charges that she could face?
Well, that heightens the charges, obviously. If in fact that baby was born alive, Kentucky law states obviously this could be a manslaughter murder case at that point. But that's the issue. We have this, I think there's a timeline between when she stopped doing a lot of social media till now. So she may have known she was pregnant. But the question then belies is, how deeply did she keep this under wraps? I mean, apparently she delivered the baby at the home, at the residence, and this is the big argument. That's why that crime scene had to be really careful. Placentas, obviously, umbilical cord, these things were all hopefully taken into custody if weren't they available. That's another thing into it. If they weren't there, is she hiding something? And that's the investigators to do. And that's why these cuppies are so difficult, because we don't really know right now what happened to the baby, but our determination is to find out what happened. And that's why the initial crime scene investigation is paramount, because everything froze at that time at that location, and the investigators hopefully created a crime scene where they sealed everything off and they did a top-to-bottom search of the location.
What type of experience, like training, do you have as a detective? Where, I mean, this is a crime scene. To your point, I mean, this is very delicate, and you're dealing with, placenta, umbilical cord, a very, very small victim at this point. Laken Snelling herself is, going through, she just went through a medical episode. We believe, it's unclear, how long after birth when law enforcement was called. But I mean, what type of training do detectives have to deal with what they are taking from the scene as evidence in a case like this?
Well, that depends on the agency. Some get a lot of training on homicide investigations. Baby death investigations, there are not a lot of them, but they do get some sort of training. That's why when it comes to this investigation, I believe special victims within department is working this. So hopefully you have investigators that are nuanced into understanding infant baby deaths. And the benefit also is you need prosecutors who do the same thing, who are very nuanced in this. We were fortunate. I've worked with one prosecutor who was in Queens, and that was her thing. And she trained our investigators, through the process when we did our investigators courses throughout the years, and it was beneficial. But that depends on the agency. And that's why the questions have to be very nuanced to the doctors, because they'll have certain facts, but if we don't ask the questions properly, we may not get all the facts from them. And that's nothing wrong to say that doctors are doing something wrong. It's just we don't ask maybe not asking the right questions. So that's why training is very important, and being involved and engaged in this. And these are nuanced. I've known investigators who don't want to deal with baby cases, and that's another thing too. This is hard. You don't want to believe that there's criminality afoot in this, but is there a chance there is criminality? Yes. But we have to make sure the totality of circumstances determine the facts of what happened to this baby. Was this baby stillborn? And if not, baby stillborn, what evidence do we have to show that there was criminality conducted by Laken at that time? And that's why all the research and the victimology and the perpology, in a sense, we go back on the person there. We're going to continue to do that. And we want to make sure we don't want to make a mistake. That's what it comes down to. Detectives and I always say this, detectives are truth finders. We're here to find the truth of what happened. You have a lot of he said, she said, but what really happened? I'm going to base it on the investigation at hand from the location where the baby's found and outwards, from computers to relationships to conversations that person might have had with anyone else. When they had, how did she keep this so hidden? And if she didn't, how it's very unusual for someone to really keep something like this under wraps for so long. But she did her social media and kind of faded out a little bit on that. So she might have been aware of it, but somewhere along the line, someone might have been asking questions. Maybe the parents, but now you probably lost the parents in this involved too.
Yeah, as far as, if you're the Lexington Police Department, you have a question for Laken Snelling and she has an attorney. I mean, what type of access do you have at this point to her?
That's the thing. It's very limited. I mean, the attorney, she has it's attorney-client privilege. She has a right to an attorney. She's a right to counsel. She cannot be questioned without counsel present. So if she does, if her and attorney do decide to speak to the police, that attorney is going to be present during that question, and they can refuse to answer any question. And that's the American criminal justice system. You're innocent until proven guilty in the court of law, and the burden of proof to determine the criminality is based on the investigations and the work that the officers and investigators do to determine that person's guilt or innocence. Because they're not always looking to find people who are guilty. We're looking to find the truth in this. If Laken didn't commit a crime, let the facts support that. Let the information that the investigators found and the doctors found, the autopsy, the ME's office find, and that will be the way in which we know this was an unfortunate death of a baby, and Laken did the wrong thing by hiding it and tampering with evidence at that time. So that's the one aspect of it.
When it comes to tampering with a corpse, which is the charge that she is facing because she gave birth to this baby, and then at some point that baby ended up in the closet in a trash bag with everything else that she used to clean up the scene. And she, after being read her Miranda rights, reportedly admitted to those things. I mean, at this point, if the baby was stillborn and she did that, I mean, that seems like it would be a pretty strong case against her. Like, how would you see this case going forward where, I mean, clearly she is the parent, from what we've been told, of this baby boy. I guess my question would be, when does the law become, this wasn't just a private birth at home, this was something actually criminal?
Well, right now we're seeing the criminality in question, that you have a deceased baby and she tampered with the evidence there. The next issue is, did they? And this is what happens when it comes to news articles. You're not get everything, all the nuances done by the investigators. They're not going to say, "Oh, she admitted to it." She may not have admitted to it. They may not even ask the question. Oh, they did answer the question. She denied it. So that's one thing. So if she's saying this is what happened, we have a timeline. We have her statements locked in at that moment. Now we have to go back on that part of it. If she said that the baby was born dead, that's where we can talk to we go to the ME's office. We're looking at that. We're going to find out certain things, what they might have had on scene, which is photos, obviously, of that crime scene, photos of the baby when the baby was there. That should have been done too. That's all going to be done. So when that's brought to the ME's office, they have more information on our side. They're only dealing with unfortunately, when we talk about this, you're only dealing with the body. Whatever happened to that body prior to, they may not know of unless the investigators looked at it and said, this is what happened from what we've gathered our information. Here's all the resources we've had. This is what we've obtained. Now, does this match to what's being said by Laken to what we see on the body?
When it comes to her bond, and bond is, I mean, we've talked about some cases where a judge would let someone out on bond on a serious crime, and it's easy in hindsight to look at that judge and be like, what are you doing? In this case, she did not have a criminal record. She's not accused of murder or manslaughter at this point. So she gets $100,000, no ankle monitor. She is living at home with her parents. If you're an investigator on this case, do you feel good about that decision by the judge?
We have to abide by it. And that's one thing. I've seen people released on their own recognizance. We see it a lot in New York right now. But I've seen people who've committed robberies and assaults have been released. You may not like it, but that's the reality of the system. We are part of it. We're actors in the system. We bring what we can to the table. What the courts do at that point sometimes depends on the actions of the investigators, depends on the police. But in this case, if they have nothing more on her to make her, to keep her in jail. And the thing is, jail is about, the idea of bail anyway has been to make sure someone shows up to court. It's not a punishment factor. So it's not about a punishment. If she could afford the bond, they afford the bond, would have 10% of the bond, and then they release her to the custody. And in this case, she's going back to her parents, no ankle monitoring, because they have a firm belief that she has roots in the neighborhood, roots in the community. She was in college, she's no longer there, but they have roots to her staying there. And if she does decide to flee, bond is removed, bond is revoked, and then there's an arrest warrant. But as a cop, as a detective, I've seen people released for far, far worse things for pending bail. So that's the one thing here.
And knowing that where bail is really a point, and I know there's a lot of people in the public who think, I mean, there's just, jaywalking and they're like, put them behind bars, and that's just not the reality of how it works. But at the same time, if this does come back, we hear from the coroner, this is now a murder case, or this is a manslaughter case. Does that change the way the court would view her as someone getting the bond and believing that she would show up to court and all of that?
Well, that's the judicial discretion. The judge would then determine whether or not to revoke the bond and have her remanded or kept in custody. That's up to the judge. It's not up to the police to ask for that. We can't. We may encourage it, or the prosecutor may encourage it, which is one of the things that they try to do. But if a judge has that discretion and utilizes discretion, there's little that would disallow Laken to be released or detained or remanded. It'll be up to the judge if that case gets to that level and they feel that there might be a flight risk, and that's really what it comes down to, or a repeated history of criminality, which she doesn't have. So that really lessens the reasons to keep her in custody. But this is a serious case. It is, right now, the only one who knows what really happened at this point is Laken. That's the reality, and we're looking to see, and that's why the investigators have to go from what they have at that time, and then determine by everything around them whether or not she did, kill the baby. And right now, we don't have that. But that doesn't end the case, and it doesn't end the prosecution of this case either.
Yeah, and once the cause of death comes back, I think that'll be a big moment in seeing which direction the case goes from here. David Sarney, retired NYPD detective. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you much. Take care and stay safe.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.